The sun had barely risen over the quiet hills of Pine Hollow when the morning fog curled around the old fence posts that marked the edge of Henry Cole's land. 50 acres of rolling pasture stretched across the valley, every blade of grass a piece of the life he'd built over 30 years. His tractor, a weathered but dependable John Deere, was his pride, his livelihood, and in many ways, his only companion since his wife passed. It was more than a machine. It was the heartbeat of the farm. For as long as Henry could remember, the land next door had been nothing but scrub and dust, owned by the previous generation of the Halloways who kept to themselves. But things changed when their daughter, Karen Halloway, returned from the city to restore the family property. She came with big talk about modernizing the area, building new fences, enforcing property standards, and turning Pine Hollow into something it was never meant to be. At first, Henry paid her no mind. She was loud, nosy, and more concerned with appearances than community, but she stayed on her side of the fence, at least for a while. Then, the survey flags started appearing, bright orange markers driven into the soil like tiny declarations of war. Henry found one nearly 20 feet inside his own pasture, right where the ground sloped toward the creek. He pulled it out and tossed it aside. The next day, 2 more appeared. Karen didn't ask permission. She didn't even leave a note. She simply hired men with shiny trucks and clipboards to correct the property line. When Henry confronted them, they shrugged and said they were just following orders. That evening, when the sun bled red across the ridge, he watched from his porch as Karen stood by her fence, phone in hand, recording him like he was a criminal trespassing on his own land. The next morning, his tractor was gone. At first, he thought maybe his Nefitas, you had borrowed it. Then he noticed the tire tracks leading straight across the disputed boundary up to Karen's side. His stomach turned cold. She'd taken it. No explanation, no message, just gone. Henry walked over to confront her, but she was already waiting. Her smug expression said everything. She believed the tractor was hers now, that she had every right to claim it because, according to her updated boundary survey, that section of land, and anything on it, belonged to her. The sheriff, when called, arrived with an awkward half-smile and a notebook. He said it was a civil dispute, not a criminal one, and he couldn't get involved until the matter went before a judge. The law moved slow. Karen moved fast. Within days, she posted photos of herself sitting on the tractor on her social media page, captioned with thinly veiled insults about entitled old men who can't read land deeds. Her followers, mostly from nearby towns, laughed and encouraged her. Some even drove by Henry's farm to take pictures. Henry's reputation, once solid as oak, began to splinter. Rumors spread like wildfire through Pine Hollow, that he'd encroached on her land, that he was bitter and senile, that maybe the Halloways should just buy him out. For a man of quiet dignity, it was humiliation in its purest form. But humiliation has a way of hardening into resolve. That evening, Henry sat in his workshop surrounded by the hum of old machinery. On the wall hung his father's rusted tools and a faded photo of his wife smiling in front of the tractor. For the first time in years, he felt the same slow-burning anger that once kept him alive through hardship and loss. If the sheriff wouldn't help, and if the law was too slow, then he'd fight the only way he could, by turning Karen's arrogance against her. She wanted attention. She thrived on it. So he would give it to her, just not in the way she expected. He started by documenting everything, the tire tracks, the survey markers, the date and time she took the tractor. Then he began sharing his story online, not through anger, but through quiet truth. He didn't rant or accuse. He told it plain, the way small-town folks appreciate. Photos of the tractor, screenshots of her posts, the contrast between her smugness and his patience. Within days, his first video reached thousands. People across the county started to pay attention. Farmers recognized his name. Former neighbors spoke up. Comments poured in, not in Karen's favor, but in his. Karen, however, didn't back down. If anything, she escalated, posting videos mocking him, claiming he was harassing her. She even spray-painted her initials across the side of the tractor, claiming it as property improvement. By week's end, Pine Hollow wasn't quiet anymore. Every gas station, diner, and feed store was buzzing with talk about the tractor feud. And Henry knew this was only the beginning. The battle wasn't about land anymore. It was about reputation, respect, and justice. He had been underestimated his whole life, but not this time. Not by her. He'd been patient long enough. Now, it was time to turn the whole town against her, slowly, methodically, and without ever raising his voice. As the moon rose over the ridge and the sound of crickets filled the air, Henry walked out to his porch, looked toward Karen's glowing porch light, and smiled for the first time in weeks. The real fight hadn't even started yet. Word spreads fast in small towns, faster than wildfire on dry grass, and in Pine Hollow, gossip was practically a sport. What started as a few sympathetic comments under Henry's quiet video became a current of whispers running through every corner of the valley. The feed store clerk mentioned it to a customer. The customer told her brother. Her brother worked at the local diner. And before long, even people who'd never met Henry had formed opinions about the feud. Karen, of course, was thrilled at first. Attention was her oxygen. She loved the sound of her own name echoing across conversations, even if half the town thought she was wrong. Her online following grew with every sarcastic post she made. Videos of her polishing the tractor, laughing about boomers who don't understand property rights, and showing off new plans for her land. But Henry understood something Karen didn't. Pine Hollow might have watched from the sidelines, but its people had long memories. They knew who worked hard, who paid their debts, and who showed respect. Karen's smugness was fuel for resentment. Henry just had to fan the flames gently. He began small. He donated a load of hay to the local animal shelter, quietly mentioning in passing that he would have done more if he still had his tractor. He helped an elderly neighbor mend a fence and refused payment, saying only that he had time now that his equipment had been stolen. He never named names. He didn't need to. The story filled in itself. Within a week, the tone shifted. People began to stop him on the street, asking if the rumors were true. Henry never confirmed nor denied. He just smiled, humble and quiet. His restraint made him believable. His silence was louder than Karen's shouting. Meanwhile, Karen's behavior grew more erratic. Every day she filmed new videos, desperate to control the narrative. She flaunted her tractor like a trophy, claiming victory over lazy old-timers and boasting about her legal win, though no court had even heard the case yet. But arrogance, when left unchecked, eventually turns to self-destruction. Henry's online posts began reaching beyond Pine Hollow. Agricultural forums picked up the story. Rural news blogs featured it. One post in particular, a side-by-side image of Karen spray-painting her initials on the tractor next to Henry's old family photo, went viral. The caption was simple. Some things can be bought. Pride isn't one of them. It wasn't rage that captured people's attention. It was dignity. The quiet defiance of a man standing for what was right, without ever stooping to his enemy's level. The internet loved that kind of story. The underdog, the wronged man, the villain with a perfect smile and hollow morals. Soon, even Karen's own followers started turning on her. Comments appeared beneath her videos questioning her actions, mocking her arrogance, and defending Henry. She deleted them as fast as she could, but the screenshots lived on. Offline, Pine Hollow's social fabric began to shift. The diner where she loved to drink her morning coffee grew cold toward her. Conversations stopped when she walked in. The hardware store suddenly had supply issues whenever she placed an order. Even the local council, which had once admired her enthusiasm for improvement, started distancing themselves. And Henry? He didn't lift a finger. He just kept doing what he always did, tending his animals, repairing his fences, greeting everyone with the same steady calm. The storm was working for him now, but victory wasn't yet in reach. Karen, increasingly desperate, filed a complaint with the county about Henry's unsanitary property. She claimed his barn violated code. Inspectors came, cameras in hand. They found nothing wrong, but the stunt reminded everyone that she wasn't done fighting. That night, as the wind howled across the valley and the first autumn leaves danced down the road, Henry sat in his living room, watching his old videos gain traction. Hundreds of thousands of views, thousands of comments, people from all over sending support, offering help, even money. He didn't care about fame or pity. He wanted justice, and a clean kind of revenge, the kind that left no doubt who the real villain was. He knew the next step wouldn't just involve words. It had to be public, visible, irrefutable, something that showed everyone, especially the county and the sheriff, what she'd done. Do was wait, and prepare for the moment when her own arrogance would collide with reality. He spent his evenings combing through her online posts, downloading every clip, every photo, every timestamp where she boasted about owning the tractor. The evidence painted a clear timeline, proof that she had knowingly taken property that wasn't hers. He gathered statements from neighbors who'd seen her drive it across the boundary line. Every detail mattered. He wasn't going to rely on emotion or sympathy. He was going to use precision, truth, and timing. The storm he was building wasn't loud. It was deliberate. By the end of the month, Henry had quietly become something of a legend. His followers online referred to him as the farmer who fought back. His story had reached beyond Pine Hollow, even attracting a few small-town justice channels and rural news vloggers. They made videos, each more dramatic than the last, showing Karen's posts side by side with footage of Henry's modest life. The contrast was striking. She, manicured and self-satisfied, he, weathered and resolute. Then came the council meeting. Karen had called for it herself, hoping to resolve the property issue publicly. She wanted validation, an audience, and one final stage to humiliate Henry. Flyers went up around town. The meeting would take place in the old Pine Hollow Grange Hall, a place that had hosted everything from high school dances to town funerals. When the night came, the hall was packed. Farmers, shopkeepers, ranch hands, even teenagers with phones ready to film. It seemed like the entire town had come to witness the showdown. Karen arrived first, in a tailored coat and heeled boots, walking like a celebrity facing the press. Henry came second, wearing his work jacket and a quiet, unreadable expression. The council sat in the front, stiff and nervous. They knew the feud had become bigger than any property line. It was now a symbol of pride, fairness, and the way small towns policed their own morality. Karen spoke first. She gave a long, breathless speech about progress, law, and modern standards, waving around documents that supposedly proved her right. She smiled for the cameras, confident that her poise would sway the crowd. But when Henry stood, the room changed. He didn't speak with passion or anger. He spoke like a man who had nothing left to prove. He laid out the timeline, showing printed photos and screenshots of her social media posts, the ones where she'd bragged, mocked him, and claimed ownership of his tractor. The silence in the hall was absolute. Every word hit like a hammer. Then he presented the final image. Karen spray-painting her initials across the tractor, her face lit up with pride. The same image that had gone viral online weeks earlier. Gasps filled the room. A few people even stood, shaking their heads in disbelief. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't need to deliberate long. What had started as her attempt to shame him had ended as her public undoing. By the time the meeting adjourned, Karen was pale and trembling. Her carefully built image had shattered. The crowd that once tolerated her now avoided her gaze. Someone muttered, "Serves her right," as she stormed out. Henry didn't follow. He didn't need to. That night, the town's social media feeds exploded. Clips from the meeting spread everywhere. Hashtags with Henry's name trended locally. Even people who'd never cared about land disputes found themselves cheering for him. Karen had turned the town into an audience, and now the same spotlight she'd craved was burning her. But Henry knew this wasn't over. Pride, like hers, didn't vanish overnight. It imploded. And when it did, it tended to take everything around it down in flames. He could feel it in his bones. A real storm was still coming. As he stood on his porch under the cold stars, watching the dark outline of Karen's property across the fence, he knew she wasn't going to fade quietly. She would. Strike back. And when she did, he would be ready. Because the fight was no longer about a tractor. It was about respect. About the line between right and wrong. And Henry Cole intended to make sure everyone in Pine Hollow saw that line carved clear as day, once and for all. The first sign of Karen's retaliation came 3 days after the council meeting. A heavy wind swept across Pine Hollow that morning, scattering leaves and whispers alike. When Henry stepped outside, his gut sank. His barn door was wide open, and the padlock, one he'd had since his father's time, lay twisted on the ground. Inside, tools were missing. The shelves were overturned, boxes smashed. Someone had ransacked the place. He knew immediately who it was. There was no need for proof. The fury wasn't in the loss of things. Henry could replace tools. It was the violation that cut deep. His home, his sanctuary, had been invaded. Karen had always been brazen, but this was reckless. It meant she was unraveling, pushed past the point of reason. He didn't call the sheriff this time. He didn't need a report to tell him what he already knew, that the system wouldn't protect him. The town's sympathy was enough. Pine Hollow had already made up its mind about who was guilty and who was not. Still, Henry understood something about vengeance. It burned both ways if handled carelessly. He wasn't going to lash out. He was going to build something instead. Something permanent. Something she couldn't twist. That afternoon, he walked his land with a camera, documenting every inch. He posted a new video online, not accusing anyone, just showing the aftermath. The mess in the barn, the broken latch, the silence between words. Viewers saw the truth without him having to say it. And the response was immediate. Messages of outrage, support, and sympathy poured in. Within days, his story caught national attention. A few rural advocacy groups reached out, offering legal help. Lawyers from 2 counties over volunteered to represent him pro bono, calling it a matter of principle. But as the support grew, so did Karen's desperation. Her posts became erratic, long rants accusing Henry of orchestrating a smear campaign, claiming she was being harassed by fake accounts and small-minded locals. Her followers, once loyal, had dwindled to a few dozen. The rest had turned silent or joined Henry's side. Then came the night of the fire. It started small, just a flicker at the edge of the pasture, near the disputed line. Henry noticed it around midnight, a faint orange glow through the fog. By the time he reached it, flames were licking the old wooden fence, spreading fast through the dry grass. He grabbed a shovel, a hose, anything he could find, and fought it alone in the dark. The air was thick with smoke and ash. Every breath tore at his throat. By sunrise, he had beaten it back. His hands were raw, his clothes charred, but the damage was contained. The tractor, though, still sitting on Karen's land, had been scorched on one side, the paint bubbling where the fire had kissed its metal frame. The sheriff came again, this time with more urgency. He walked the boundary, took photos, and said the fire's origin looked suspicious. But without witnesses, there wasn't much to do. That didn't matter. Pine Hollow didn't need official statements anymore. Everyone knew what had happened, and everyone knew who had done it. The shift was complete. Karen, once the self-proclaimed voice of progress, was now a pariah. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. The local market refused to sell her supplies. Her name had become a warning, spoken in the same tone people reserved for storms and bad omens. Henry stayed silent through it all. He worked the land, rebuilt his barn door, and kept his head down. But inside, a storm of his own was brewing. He hadn't wanted to ruin her. He just wanted peace. But she'd taken everything too far, crossed too many lines. One afternoon, as he watched a small group of reporters film near the property line, Henry realized the truth. This story wasn't just about him and Karen anymore. It had become a symbol. Rural justice against arrogance, humility against vanity. He could end it. He just needed one final act, something that would expose her completely, not through anger, but through undeniable truth. That evening, as the sky darkened, he set up cameras around his property. Quiet, motion-triggered devices, cheap, simple, effective. He had a feeling she wouldn't be able to stay away. She'd lost everything. Her followers, her respect, her power. All she had left was bitterness. And bitterness always returned to the scene of its own destruction. For 3 nights, nothing happened. But on the 4th, just before dawn, a shadow moved along the fence line. A flashlight beam cut through the mist. The figure crept toward his property. Familiar posture. Familiar jacket. The camera caught everything. The next morning, Henry didn't post it online. Not yet. He sent the footage directly to the sheriff and to the local news. It was the final piece of the story. The proof that Karen Holloway wasn't a victim of rumor, but the architect of her own downfall. When the footage aired that evening, the reaction was swift. Headlines called it, "Tractor Thief Exposed." Social media erupted again, but this time, it wasn't with gossip. It was with closure. People saw her caught red-handed, sneaking onto Henry's property under cover of night. The narrative she had built crumbled to dust, and just like that, the town turned completely. Karen stopped showing her face in public. Her property fell silent, the lights in her windows dark. She had wanted the spotlight, but when it burned too hot, she disappeared into the shadows. Henry didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply stood at his fence, staring across the line she had fought so hard to claim, and felt something close to peace. Tinged with exhaustion, but peace nonetheless. The storm had passed, but he knew there would be one final chapter before the valley could truly be quiet again. Winter settled over Pine Hollow like a heavy blanket, muting sound and slowing life to a crawl. The pastures lay frozen, the trees bare, and the fields slept beneath thin layers of frost. For the first time in months, Henry felt a fragile stillness returning to his land. The air no longer carried the hum of gossip or the sting of accusation. What had once been chaos had quieted into watchful calm. But peace in small towns is fragile, always waiting for someone to stir the ashes. After the footage aired, the sheriff's department had little choice but to act. Karen was brought in for questioning, her name finally inked into official records. The charge was simple but damning: trespassing and property damage with evidence as clear as day. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been checking the boundary for safety, but the video showed her moving in the dead of night, flashlight trembling in her hand, pausing where the fire had started weeks before. When the news broke, Pine Hollow exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Justice, in its quiet, methodical way, had finally caught up to her. But Henry didn't celebrate. He watched from afar as the town absorbed the story, as people talked in low tones at the diner and the feed store, as Karen's name faded from conversations replaced by the familiar rhythm of daily life. That was enough for him. Then came the letter. It arrived one morning in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a typed message, brief and bitter. Karen accused him of destroying her life, claiming she'd been driven to the edge by his campaign of humiliation, and the letter wasn't an apology. It was a warning wrapped in self-pity. At the bottom, in her sharp handwriting, she'd written, "You may have the town, but you'll never have peace." Henry read it once, then folded it neatly and tucked it into a drawer. There was no satisfaction in her downfall, no pride left in her misery. He had never wanted vengeance. He'd wanted truth. But truth had its own gravity. It pulled everything into the open, even the things you wished would stay buried. The weeks that followed were quiet but uneasy. Karen's property stood dark and unkempt, her once perfect fences sagging, her house windows covered by drawn curtains. Some said she'd left town. Others swore they saw her late at night, moving through her yard like a ghost. Pine Hollow whispered again, but this time it was out of pity. Henry went about his work. The tractor was finally returned, rusted on one side, its engine coughing like an old man, but still his. He spent hours cleaning it, restoring it, almost as though fixing the machine could mend something deeper inside him. He posted one final video, showing the tractor back where it belonged, the sunrise reflecting off its hood. He didn't mention Karen. He just ended it with a simple line: "Some things find their way home." It went viral instantly, not because of drama or spectacle, but because of its quiet triumph. People from all over the country commented words like respect, justice, and honor. Others simply said, "You did it right." But just as Henry began to believe the storm had truly passed, something shifted again. One evening, while closing up the barn, he noticed the fence gate slightly ajar. Footprints, small, sharp, unmistakably hers, marked the frost. They led not onto his land, but away from it, toward the woods beyond the boundary. He followed them for a few yards before stopping. There was no sign of her, only silence and the wind moving through the trees. He told himself it didn't matter. Let her vanish. Let her find her peace elsewhere. But that night, sleep wouldn't come. Memories of the letter haunted him. Her words, the bitterness, the warning. The next morning, a deputy knocked on his door. They had found Karen's truck abandoned by the creek, keys still inside. No note, no footprints leading away, just tire marks and the faint outline of where someone had stood for a long time, staring into the cold water. The search lasted 3 days. Volunteers from the town helped, even those who had once despised her. The sheriff organized search parties, drones, dogs, nothing. It was as though she had simply vanished into the woods that bordered both their lands. When the search was finally called off, Pine Hollow fell into a silence heavier than before. People spoke her name softly, if at all. The feud that had once entertained and divided them had ended in something darker, something final. Henry felt no victory now, only a hollow ache. The fight had consumed too much, taken too long. What had begun as a stolen tractor had become a spiral of pride, anger, and ruin. He stood by the fence one last time, the morning light stretching across both properties. Her land lay still, the wind moving through brittle grass. The boundary that had caused so much pain looked meaningless now, a thin line between survival and destruction. Henry took a breath, heavy with regret and resolve. He had defended his name, his dignity, and his home, but the cost had been higher than he ever imagined. Pine Hollow would remember the story for years, the man who fought for his land, the woman who lost everything to pride. But Henry knew better. There were no winners, only lessons carved into the soil. Still, as he climbed onto his tractor, hands steady on the wheel, he felt something shift inside him. The land was his again, not just by law or by public opinion, but by endurance. It had tested him, broken him, and in some strange way, rebuilt him. He turned the key. The engine roared to life. Justice in Pint. A hollow had never come easy, but it had come at last. Spring crept back into Pine Hollow slowly, thawing the frost and washing the land in green again. Months had passed since Karen Holloway vanished, and the valley had begun to forget her name. The story that once divided the town was now a cautionary tale whispered quietly between neighbors, an echo of pride, vengeance, and consequence. Henry Cole rose each morning before the sun, as he always had, though something in him had changed. His steps were slower, his face more lined, but his eyes carried a strange calm, the look of a man who had walked through fire and found his way back out. The farm was alive again. The barn stood repaired, the fences straight, and the tractor, once stolen and burned, hummed softly beneath his steady hands. He didn't talk much about what had happened. When people asked, he'd just nod and say, "It's over." But the land remembered. Every scar in the soil told the story. Every post replaced. Every field tilled anew, marked the cost of reclaiming what was his. The town had moved on too, though not without lessons. Where there had once been blind politeness, now there was awareness. People looked out for one another more. They didn't let arrogance hide behind charm anymore. Pine Hollow had grown wiser, if a little sadder. Henry's videos still lived online. Millions had seen them. Thousands had commented, but he had stopped posting. Fame had never been his goal. He didn't want to be the viral farmer or the man who took down a Karen. He wanted peace, the kind that didn't need to be recorded. One morning in late April, as the fields began to bloom, Henry decided to take the tractor down by the creek. The earth was soft, the air heavy with the scent of wet grass and wildflowers. He hadn't been near that part of the property since the fire. Too many memories lay buried there. The creek still ran cold and clear, winding between stones slick with moss. Birds call it in the distance. The sound was gentle, almost forgiving. For a while he just stood there watching the water flow past, wondering if it carried pieces of the past with it. That's when he saw it, a flash of color caught in a thicket near the opposite bank. He crossed the shallow edge, boots sinking into the mud, and reached down. It was a piece of cloth, tattered and faded red, the same color as the jacket Karen used to wear. His breath caught, not in fear but in something heavier, deeper, a reminder that some endings never truly end. He didn't report it. There was nothing left to prove, no satisfaction to chase. The sheriff had closed her case months ago, citing no evidence of foul play. Maybe she'd left. Maybe she'd found a way to start over somewhere else. Or maybe Pine Hollow had simply swallowed her, as it had done with so many stories before. Henry placed the torn fabric in his pocket, then climbed back onto his tractor. As the engine roared to life, he looked out across the horizon, the same hills he'd tended for most of his life, the same valley that had tested him, broken him, and rebuilt him. The fields were ready for planting again, ready for a new beginning. He thought about his wife, about the quiet life they'd built before pride and pettiness had invaded it. He thought about the people who'd stood by him when things got ugly, and even about Karen, how someone so full of certainty could fall so far, so fast. Justice had come, but it had come with weight. And Henry understood now that justice was never about winning. It was about balance. The land took what it was owed and gave back what it could. As the tractor rolled forward, the soil broke open beneath the blade, rich and dark. Seeds fell into the earth one by one, steady and sure. Life replacing ruin. Growth following loss. The sun rose higher, painting the valley gold. From his porch, a neighbor waved, but Henry raised a hand in return, a faint smile, tugging at the corner of his mouth. Pine Hollow was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt earned. By evening, the fields lay planted, rows stretching neat and endless across the land. Henry parked the tractor by the barn, the engine ticking as it cooled. He stood there for a moment, the smell of soil and oil thick in the air, and listened. To the wind in the grass, the distant hum of cicadas, the heartbeat of a land that never truly forgot. He looked toward the boundary one last time, the line that had started it all. Now it was just a fence, wood and wire, nothing more. Henry tipped his hat to it, almost out of habit, and turned toward home. The sun sank low, turning the world amber. The last light caught the fields, the barn, and the man who refused to be broken, and for the first time in a long time, the valley looked at peace. Pine Hollow would remember his story. They would tell it in hushed tones, over coffee and cold mornings, a reminder that sometimes justice doesn't come with a hammer or a badge, but with patience, persistence, and truth. And somewhere, out there in the quiet hills, the echoes of that truth still lingered, woven into the wind, etched into the soil, carried by the land itself. The story of the man who lost everything, fought with silence and turned a whole town against a lie. Henry Cole's land was his again, his name restored, his peace hard won. The last harvest had come, and it was good.